In less than a week, it was I, and not Alvin, who was bandaging his stump, and by then I'd practiced enough on myself and without again throwing up that he hadn't once to complain of the bandages being too tight or too loose. I did this nightly, even after his stump had healed and he was walking regularly on the artificial leg, to stave off a resurgence of the swelling. All the while the stump was healing, the artificial leg had been at the back of the clothes closet, largely hidden from sight by the shoes on the floor and by the trousers hanging down from the crossrod. It still took some doing not to notice it, but I was determined, and didn't know what it was made of till the day Alvin took it out and put it on. Except for its eerily replicating the shape of the lower half of a real lower limb, everything about it was horrible, but horrible and wonder both, and a wonder both. Beginning with what Alvin called his harness, the dark leather thigh corset that laced up in the front and extended from just below the buttock to the top of the kneecap, and that was attached to the prosthesis by hinged steel joints on either side of the knee. The stump, with a long white woolen sock pulled over it, fit snugly into a cushioned socket carved under the top of the prosthesis, which was fashioned of hollowed out wood with air holes punched into it, and, not as I'd been imagining, by a length of black rubber resembling a comic book bludgeon. At the end of the leg was an artificial foot that flexed only a few degrees and was cushioned with a sponge sole. It screwed neatly into the leg, without any of the hardware showing, and though it looked more like a wooden shoe tree than a living foot with separate toes, when Alvin slipped into his socks and shoes, the socks washed by my mother, the shoes shined by me, you'd have thought that the feet were both his own. The first day back on his artificial leg, Alvin exercised in the alleyway, by walking back and forth from the garage at the far end to the scrawny hedge enclosing the tiny front yard, but never a step farther, to where he could be seen by someone out in the street. The second day he again exercised alone in the morning, but when I got home from school he took me outdoors with him for another session, this time not just concentrating on his walking, but pretending that the soundness of his stump and the fit of his prosthesis and the long future ahead as a one-legged man weren't weighing on his mind. The following week Alvin was wearing the leg around the house all day, and the week after that he said to me, "Go get the football." Only we didn't own a football. Owning a football was as big a deal as owning cleats or shoulder pads, and no kid had one who wasn't rich. And I couldn't just go and sign one out from the playground back of the school unless we were going to use it right there. So what I did, I who'd not stolen anything so far other than some change from my parents' pockets, what I did without a moment's hesitation was to stroll down Keir Avenue to where there were one-family houses with front and back lawns, and case every driveway until I saw what I was after, a football to steal, a real leather Wilson football, scuffed from the pavement, with worn leather lacing and a bladder you inflated, that some kid with money had left unattended. I tucked it under my arm and took off, tearing all the way up the hill to Summit Avenue, as if I were returning a kickoff for old Notre Dame. That afternoon we practiced pass plays in the alleyway for close to an hour, and at night, when we examined the stump together beneath our bedroom's closed door, we saw not one sign of its breaking down, even though, while tossing me his perfect left-handed spirals, Alvin had been taking practically the whole of his weight on the artificial limb. I didn't have a choice, is the defense I would have formulated had I been caught in the act on Keir Avenue that day. My cousin Alvin wanted a football, Your Honor. He lost his leg fighting Hitler, and now he's home, and he wanted a football. What else could I possibly do? But then, by then, a month had passed since the awful homecoming at Penn Station, and though it wasn't necessarily pleasant, I'd feel no revulsion to speak of. When, while going for my shoes in the morning, I reached to the back of the closet for Alvin's prosthesis and handed it across to where he was seated on the bed in his undershorts, waiting his turn in the bathroom. The grimness was fading, and he'd begun gaining weight, gorging himself between meals on fistfuls of whatever was in the refrigerator, and his eyes didn't look so enormous, and his hair had grown thick again, wavy hair so black it had a waxen sheen. And as he sat there, semi-helpless, with his stump exposed. There was more each morning for a boy who worshipped him to worship, and what there was to pity was a little less impossible to bear. Soon Alvin was no longer confining himself to the alleyways, and without having to rely on the crutches or the cane that it humiliated him to use in public, he was all over the place on his artificial leg, shopping for my mother at the butcher's, the bakery, and the vegetable store, buying a hot dog for himself down at the corner, taking the bus not only to the dentist on Clinton Avenue, but all the way on to Market Street to buy a new shirt at Larky's, and also, as I didn't yet know, dropping by the playing fields back of the high school with his separation pay in his pocket to see who might be hanging around wanting to play poker or shoot craps. After school one day, the two of us made room in the storage bin for the wheelchair, and that night after dinner I reported to my mother something that had dawned on me at school. Wherever I was, no matter what I was supposed to be doing, I found myself thinking about Alvin and how I could get him to forget about his prosthesis, and so I said to my mother, "If Alvin had a zipper on the side of his pant leg, it would be easier for him, wouldn't it, to get in and out of his pants when he got his leg on?" The next morning, on her way to work, my mother dropped off a pair of Alvin's army trousers with a neighborhood seamstress who worked out of her house, and the seamstress was able to open the side seam and sew in a zipper that extended some 6 inches up the uncuffed left pant leg. That night, when Alvin pulled on the trousers after having undone the zipper, the pant leg passed easily over the prosthesis without his having to curse everyone on earth just because he was getting dressed. And when he closed the zipper, you couldn't see it. "You don't even know it's there!" I cried. In the morning, we put all his other trousers in a paper bag for my mother to take to the seamstress to fix. "I couldn't live without you," Alvin said to me when we went to bed that night. "I couldn't put on my pants without you." And he gave me to keep forever the Canadian medal that he'd been awarded for performance under exceptional circumstances. It was a circular silver medal on one side, King George VI in profile on the other, a triumphant lion standing on the body of a dragon. I, of course, cherished it and began to wear it regularly, but with the narrow green ribbon from which it hung pinned to my undershirt, so no one would see it and question my loyalty to the United States. I left it in my drawer at home only on days I had gym and we had to strip off our outer shirts to exercise. But where did this leave Sandy? Because he was himself so busy, he seemed at first not to notice my breakneck transformation into personal valet to a decorated Canadian war hero who'd now gone ahead and decorated me. And when he did, and was made miserable at first, not so much because of Alvin's involvement with me, which was bound to follow from our new sleeping arrangements, but because of the hostile indifference Alvin evinced toward him, it was too late to oust me from the great supporting role with its nauseating duties that I'd virtually been forced to undertake, and that, to Sandy's surprise, had elicited such sublime recognition in the waning years of my long career as his little brother. And all of this had been achieved without my once alluding to Sandy's affiliation by way of Aunt Esther and Rabbi Bengelsdorf with our present hateful administration. Everyone, including my brother, had avoided speaking of the OAA and just folks anywhere near Alvin, convinced that until he came to understand how the enormous popularity of Lindbergh's isolationist policies had begun to win the support of many Jews, and how it was far less traitorous than it might appear for a Jewish boy Sandy's age to have been drawn to the adventure that just folks offered, there'd be nothing to mitigate the outrage of the most self-sacrificing and staunchest Lindbergh hater of us all. But Alvin seemed already to have sensed that Sandy had let him down, and, being Alvin, didn't bother disguising his feelings. I'd said nothing, my parents had said nothing, certainly Sandy hadn't said anything to incriminate himself in Alvin's eyes, and yet Alvin had come to know, or to behave as though he knew, that the first one to welcome him home at the train station had also been first to sign on with the fascists. And there we will pause.